Welcome back. Now, the Public Relations Officer of the Nigeria Police Force, DSP Frank Mba, joins us from our Abuja studios. We'd like to thank you for joining us on the program. I'd like to begin with what indeed a lot of activists are saying shouldn't be happening, and that is, would you say that the cases of rape that is happening across the country, we're getting to a stage that we can call it a pandemic?
Thank you, Millicent, for having me on this program. First of all, let me acknowledge the fact that indeed we have big challenge in our hands, particularly as it regards the increasing cases of not just rape, but also other forms of sexual violence and offenses across our country. But the truth really, I don't really think you've gotten to a point where we'll describe it as a pandemic, but it is actually a problem that deserves all men of goodwill and women of goodwill to come together and unite to fight off the scourge. And the good news is the fact that Nigerians have realized that indeed we have a problem in our hands, and citizens have woken up from sleep. And when we saw those protests, we saw those sensitization campaigns going on across the country, we welcome the campaigners, because we see them not as lawbreakers, but we see them as partners in progress. And we need to continue that kind of sensitization and campaign to at least help to break the conspiracy of silence, and also give victims of these kind of crimes the needed moral and psychological support they need, that is required of them to actually step forward and make necessary report. And if you notice again,
if I would just quickly cutting, and that is with what you're saying, that it appears people have woken up. But the question also arises, and that is, what explanation would you give as to why it's become widespread? Looking at the number from January of this year to where we are now, is it a case of the lockdown ease? Is it as a result of the pandemic? Or are we looking at cases that were not reported and are now becoming reported?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. One of the major causal factors is actually the lockdown. What the lockdown did was it confided people into an enclosed environment. One of the key conditions for rape, and particularly for sexual molestation of minors, to actually take place is opportunity. Whenever you're investigating a case of a sexual molestation of a young person, as an investigator, you must be looking at for those times, those moments where the victim and the suspect had time together without a third party being with them. That's to say access and privacy are key. And during this period, a lot of our young girls are not going to school. A lot of them are locked down in their homes. And also some of these sexually perverted men are also idling away. So that provided a kind of enabling environment for this kind of crimes to thrive. And of course, the other factor for me is the fact that traditionally, rape cases and other forms of sexual violence offenses are never reported. As a matter of fact, some statistics out there shows that sometimes up to 90% of these cases are not reported. They are even worse when they has to do with sexual molestation of children, or when they has to do with incest, in which case both the victim and the suspect have got blood relationship or filial relationship. So, but what is happening right now is that gradually we are breaking down that conspiracy of silence, and we're also taking advantage of technology. The social media is emboldening people, and sometimes people who could not even have access to police stations, to medical facilities, are beginning to use their smartphones to actually make some of these reports. And so what you are seeing might not be, at the end of the day, an upsurge in the real sense of the word, but rather an increased reporting of these cases, which
DCP,
is also very, very important to us. Because without these cases coming to the fore, governmental agencies and people like you will not be talking about them.
Now, does the Nigeria police encourage out-of-court settlements for cases of sexual and gender-based violence?
We do not. And I will say that in very unequivocal terms. The rape cases are not compatible cases. Rape cases are very serious offenses. They are felonies. And we have continued to prosecute most of the suspects we arrested. Even in cases where some of the families of the victims have approached the police to actually drop these cases, there have been most of these cases where the police insist on going ahead to prosecute these cases. And it can be very, very frustrating. It can also be very disappointing when, as an investigator, you work so hard to put your facts together, you work too hard to put your bits and pieces of evidence together and build up what you think is a formidable case file, only for relatives of the victims to approach the police to say they are not interested in the prosecution of those cases. And in some of those cases, the police have gone ahead to prosecute, but we have always run into the brick wall, because once the family of the victims say they are no longer interested, what you will find is that even when you call them to come to court to testify, they testify not as state witnesses, but they testify as hostile witnesses, and that can be very frustrating. So if anybody out there is telling you that the police are playing part in trying to discourage prosecution of cases, I will tell you perhaps those are things that happened in the 1950s and the 1970s, and not the police of today. Today, we've got well-trained hands, particularly in the gender desk units across the country. These are police officers that have received specialized investigations on methods of interrogation, interview, and management of victims of rape and other sexual offenses. And we have made substantial progress, so those kind of issues don't arise
Nigeria
anymore.
is counting on the Nigeria Police Force. We'd like to thank you, DCP Frank Mba, also the Force's Public Relations Officer. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Millicent. It's always a pleasure to serve.